true emotions or a lack of either have power in this world and can cause terrible, tangible change. It's the dreaded job of a witcher to make sense of it all. But that's only the fantastical part of this world. The more mundane parts of it are still given development, but also within context of the supernatural. Just in Chapter 1, you are introduced to racial tensions between humans, elves, and dwarves. In fact, this is the state of relations the first time you see either of these fantasy races, Zoltan or the dwarf outside the inn being harassed, and the elves of the Scoia'tael, which is Elvish for squirrels, named so after the tails they wear, sneaking into the outskirts for supplies they purchase from smuggler Heron Brog. And this isn't just haha, the different races sure do like to bicker, but they always come together in the end with the power of friendship. No. The Witcher world has no evil overlord nation that forces the squabbling, but otherwise good-natured races to work together. If anything qualifies for that, it would actually be the humans. The world of The Witcher is one that has been built on genocide. Multiple genocides. In more ways than one. An additional but also subtle twist is that the humans in this series are actually human. These aren't quasi-humans of a purely fictional alternate reality. Isn't it funny that humans evolved into the exact same form here, please don't think about it way, like they are in Star Wars or Game of Thrones or most other fantasy worlds? They are from capital E Earth, well their ancestors are at least. Geralt, like all of us, is probably related to King Charlemagne. But what about the kings of this Witcher world? Politics are also heavily influenced by the supernatural soup that permeates this planet. Magic is like nuclear weapon technology. If one kingdom has it, then so must all the others, or they will be conquered by the sheer unstoppable power of those that do. But magic is common enough and so relatively easy to use that all ruling kings and queens need protection from any stray sorcerer or sorceress. And so high society has to be built around this sort of marriage between mages and monarchs. Without the protection of a personal magic user, it would simply be too easy for another mage to assassinate a ruler. And without the support of said rulers, magic users, no matter how powerful, will be overwhelmed by the commoners that fear them, just as they fear witchers. This is what makes this series so fascinating. It's low fantasy and high fantasy at the same time. Its magic system has strict rules and so can be considered hard magic.
Switch out my mic for
that
my
which can be
controller.
understood like a science. But then there are curses and wild forays from barely understood forces, which would be a soft magic system, where the rules are seemingly made up as the story goes along. Some spells may just require expertise and a power source and some magic words like it's a mathematical equation being expressed. Whereas others require adaptation to superstition, the embracing of pagan-like rituals, and giving yourself over to the dominance of a power before you can fight it. This is one of the most brutally cruel fantasy worlds I have ever seen, and yet the power of love still exists here and can purge curses. The stories stay grounded despite having some larger-than-life characters. Kings and queens and emperors are clearly important, but the plight of the average worker isn't ignored either. In fact, their stories can often be the far more interesting ones. It's simply a beautiful mess of contradictory concepts and goals, like a heap of incompatible ideas that have been burned to a pile of ash and then reborn like a phoenix of cognitive dissonance. And it works. Somehow it works. From Chapter 1 onward, this game is dripping in that atmosphere. But as always, we have to ask ourselves, what about Shrek? For those unfamiliar with Shrek, all two of you, it's about an ogre's quest to reclaim his swamp when there's a huge upheaval of society in a kingdom where hundreds of characters from fairy tales live together. Sapkowski's Witcher books lean much harder into fairy tale references than the first two games, but he also did it with an admirable amount of restraint. There are many stories that can provide a gentle building to a revelatory moment when you say, this is kinda like Beauty and the Beast, or Rapunzel, or Snow White, and then you move on. Not every short story in the first two books is built around a fairy tale as a core. At least not that I can tell anyway, but I don't know every fairy tale from my own home country, never mind Poland and the rest of Europe. The one about the Striga sounds like a twisted fairy tale even if there isn't an original version that doesn't have the same amount of horror. A princess is a prisoner of an abandoned castle and a knight is hired to save her. Sounds familiar, right? Except the princess isn't a prisoner, she was the victim of a curse when she was still in the womb. The princess's mother died and her corrupted fetus continued to grow into an abomination that now hunts the kingdom's subjects for food. And instead of a noble knight, it's mutant warrior Geralt that has to thrash the princess enough so he has a chance to lift the curse. This story has a happy ending, but it comes at a cost when the princess is the opposite of grateful for being spared. This kind of feeling is present in much of the Witcher short stories. Like the